Hello everyone and welcome back to part 27. So in the previous video we were discussing about this functionality of sending and receiving friend requests. We have completed these tabs, okay, and we also rendered a list, but we have to basically switch those components with the actual components that we have basically left as a comment, okay. So the first thing that we'll be doing in this video is to basically implement the backend functionality of for this feature. I also want to point out that we implemented these routes, okay, get users, get friends, and get friend request. There is a fix in this get friends controller, okay. So click on go to definition, okay, and when you are here on this get friends, I just want to highlight that we are supposed to send a list, okay, in this data field or an array because we are going to map over it on our client side. But if you look at this query, okay, then what this is going to return, this is just doing a simple find by id query on a user model, okay. So the result for this is going to be a user's document, okay, and in order to get the friends list from a user's collection, if you go back to your users model, okay, then you can see friends is just a property inside each user, okay. So what we have to do here is, first of all, I'm going to correct this to this underscore user, okay. I'm just writing this name so that this is very clear to you what this query is going to return to us. Then I'm going to make appropriate changes here as well. So in order to get friends out of this user, what we'll have to do, we'll just have to access that property like this, right. Now this is going to return an array to our client side, okay, and this is exactly what we want. So now this problem is clear, okay. We can now move on to adding few event listeners and emitters here inside our server.js file. So back to this io.on connection, okay. When the connection is established, then we are going to actually write some more code here. First of all, I would just like to add a console log here so that you can actually verify what we are getting inside this property socket.handshake, okay. So I'm just going to write it like this. Since this is going to be an object, okay, so I'm going to console log it after stringifying it, okay. So here I'll just write json.stringify, okay, then socket.handshake.query, okay. Please make sure that while you are running the code, take a look at this, okay. Then you'll be able to understand why we have extracted user id like this, okay. Also, just a note, we are going to actually implement middleware here, okay. We can also implement middleware inside socket.io, so we'll be basically sending jwt token from our client side, okay, and then we'll be using that inside every event that we'll be processing on our backend. But for now I just want to keep things simple, okay, and that is why I'm taking you through this basic method of getting the user's id on our server side, okay. Then after this, I'm also going to make some change here, okay. In order to get boolean value, okay, out of this user id, I'm just going to convert it or cast it into a boolean, okay, like this. So I have just cutted that property user underscore id, then I have pasted it inside here like this. So I hope this is clear, okay. And after this, we have this event, okay, socket.on friend request. So this is a listener. Whenever we receive an event from our client side with this name friend request, then whatever logic we write inside this callback, that is going to be executed. So in order to make it work properly, we'll have to basically add some things here. So I'll just start with this too, okay. So here, as you can see from this data, let me actually write here as a comment. This data property is going to contain these two things, to and from. So this to is going to denote for which user this friend request is supposed to be, okay, and this from property will tell us who is sending this friend request, right. So the first thing that we'll have to do is to get those two users documents, okay. So here you can see in this line we are basically using the users model, then we are making a query that we want to fetch a user's document with the help of their id. Their id will be contained inside this property data.to and data.from, okay. So that is why we are using this as source of id, right. Then I also want to add something here, like will be just needing one particular field from our users document here, so that is why I'm just going to add that to the select. Okay, then similarly we are going to duplicate it and change things here so that we get the from. Okay, again here it's going to be data dot from. Okay, then all of this is going to be same. If you want, you can just write it like this in order to understand it more clearly. Okay, like to user and from user, right? Then the next step here is to basically create a friend request. We have already created the model for friend request. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to require this friend request model. Okay, then I'll call this create method on it. Okay, then here we'll just have to pass these two properties. The first one is going to be sender, and if you go to your friend request model, okay, then you can see this sender property is going to store a reference to a user and its type should be an object ID. Similarly, we have other property called recipient. Again, it's going to store reference to a user in our database and its type is also going to be object ID. So that is why I'm just going to pass these object IDs, okay, data.to and data.from here. So who is the sender? It's data.from. And who is the recipient? Recipient will be data.to. Okay, so I hope this is very clear to you. Then the next thing is we'll have to emit an event that you have received a new friend request. Okay, so here I'm just going to write this comment. First of all, emit event, and that event is going to be new friend request. Okay, so this we are going to deliver this event to the person who is going to receive friend request, and to the person who is basically sending this friend request will send a confirmation using another event. Okay, so here I'll just also write that as a comment. So here it will be emit event, and this time it's going to be request sent. Okay, let me correct this. Now let's actually write the body here. So I'll start by explaining what this is going to do. So here we are basically denoting to whom we want to send an event to. So we are sending an event to this user, to underscore user, and then we are basically getting their socket ID. Okay, so we have specified a particular socket ID and this event with this name will be sent to them. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Then what we are basically going to do here is we'll just pass a message for now. Okay, so I'll just write new friend request received like this. Okay, similarly let's also write this event. So here I'll say io.to, and this time we are going to send this event to the user who is basically sending this friend request. Okay, so here I'll just write from user dot socket id. Okay, and then emit, then the name of the event that we want to emit, and that is request sent. Okay, then as a next argument we can pass a payload here. Okay, so again I'm just going to send a message and that will be request sent successfully. Please remember we can also do this by using an acknowledgement. Okay, that can be done like this. If you pass a callback, okay, from our client side, then we can receive it after this data property and then we can basically make use of it to call it here. Okay, and that is basically going to send a acknowledgement to our client side. If you don't know that yet, okay, I'll be explaining that to you when discussing about sending and receiving messages. So let's actually continue with this flow right now. Okay, so right now we have completed this friend request event. Okay, then the next thing is to basically handle another event that we will be receiving on our server. Okay, so let's actually pay attention to that. So here I'll be starting by writing this socket.on and then the name of the event that we want to listen to. Okay, and that will be accept request. Okay, so when a user is going to accept the request from our client side, then this event will be emitted. Okay, here also we are going to again receive some form of data. If you want, you can just console log that and see for yourself what we are getting from our client side. Okay, so let me actually tell you what we will be getting. For each friend request there will be a document, you can say, in our database, and each document is going to have its own unique underscore id. Okay, so we are going to call it request id. Okay, or in terms of, here I can just uh, explain you by writing this. So we'll be sending this unique request id, okay, because this is going to contain the information about who was the sender of this request, who received this request, and when this request was sent. Okay, because we have defined these properties in our schema. So that is what we are going to get inside this data from our client side. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do here is I'll be fetching the request document. Okay, so I'll just write this expression here, await. Okay, then on this friend request model we are going to make a query. So I'll just write find by id. Okay, and then we can write here data dot request id. Okay, like this. So after we fetch this request document, we can just again console log this. Okay, so you can basically inspect what is contained inside this. Then we are going to basically get the sender and the receiver of this request. So in order to get the sender of this request, we can just write it like this, await. Then we'll have to make a query on this users model. Okay, then we'll write find by id. Okay, then we'll have to pass the id for the user that we are trying to fetch. So in this case it's sender. So what I'm going to do, from this request doc, I'll just refer the id of the sender, and that will be request doc dot sender. Okay, similarly we'll be fetching the document for the receiver. Okay, so here I'm just going to update this to receiver like this, and then we can also update this. So here I'll just write recipient. Okay, let me correct it. Okay, then what we are going to do here is we'll be basically accessing the friends property on each of these two documents, and then we'll be pushing a new friend request. Okay, so and then we'll be basically pushing the id of their friend, okay, that just accepted their request. So what we are going to do here is I'll just write sender dot friends. Okay, and then push. So this will be request doc dot recipient. Okay, similarly for the receiver we'll be updating their friends array. So I'll just write receiver dot friends dot post request doc dot sender. So I hope this is very clear. Okay, what we are doing here, let me just explain it to you again. So when we receive this event on our server side accept request, okay, then first of all we are fetching the request document using the request documents id that we are getting, okay, inside this data property. Then we are basically fetching the documents for sender and the receiver of this request. Then we are updating their records, okay, by pushing a new friends id in their friends array. Then we are going to save their records. Okay, so I'll just write receiver dot save. Okay, then I'll just pass some options here, new true and validate modified only. I have already explained what's the use of these options here. Okay, you can just watch the previous video. And let me also tell you once again the response of this expression, okay, that is going to return us the updated or the latest document. Okay, that is why we are passing this option new true. And for this validate modified only, we just want to specify that validation is going to run only for those fields that we have modified in this query. Okay, like we have modified this friends array, then the validator function is going to be run only for this friends field. Okay, while saving this document. So that's it, and after this we'll also have to repeat this for the sender. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate it and then update the property here to sender. Okay, then what we can do here is, as a last step, we'll have to delete this friend request from our database. Okay, we can actually preserve that. Okay, but for now we have designed our schema like this. Whenever we receive a new friend request, we'll be creating a new record for that. Okay, and while processing that request, we'll just delete that after the friend request has been denied or accepted, right? So here I'm just going to write await friend request. Okay, and then I'll just say find by id and delete. Okay, so we are going to use this new method here, find by id and delete. As the name suggests, we are just going to pass the ID for the request document that we want to delete, and it will be deleted after running this query. So I'll just say data dot request ID. Okay, so that will be data dot request underscore ID. And so now we have done all of the operations on our DB that we need to make inside this accept request. The last thing that is remaining here is to basically notify our sender and receiver that the friend request has been accepted successfully. So again, we are going to do that using this io.to and then passing the socket ID and then emitting the event. So let's actually do that so that you can also basically refresh that concept. So here again I'll be writing io.to, okay, then the socket ID to which we want to emit the event. So first of all we want to emit an event to the sender, so I'll just say io.to and then sender dot socket underscore ID, okay, and then emit like this. And then we'll be just passing the name of the event that we want to emit from our server, okay, and our client is going to listen to it. And here again I'm just going to pass a simple message, okay, as payload. So I'll just say friend request accepted like this, okay. Similarly I'm again going to duplicate it and update this for the receiver, okay. So I'll just say receiver, okay, and then receiver dot socket id dot emit, and here it will be request accepted, okay, and the message is also going to remain the same. Now I just want to actually add one more thing here, okay. After this socket.on, I'll be adding another event listener here, and that will be socket.on end, okay. We'll be basically emitting this event from our client side, okay, and we'll be listening for it here. It is going to be just an anonymous function because we are not going to actually reference it somewhere, okay. We are just basically using it as a callback, okay. And here we can actually get some params, but we don't need that here. So I'm just going to remove that params from here. Then I'm just going to first of all console log something here, okay. So I'll just say closing connection. Basically this event will be fired from our client side when the client is going to disconnect, okay. And we are also going to make sure that our client is disconnected, okay, by writing this expression socket dot disconnect and then passing this 0. So what it's going to do, it is going to just close the connection for that particular socket, okay. So I hope this is very clear to you now, okay. I'm just going to format this and save it, okay. Now we'll have to move to our client side in order to complete the code there, okay. And then after that we'll be able to basically send and receive friend request, okay. So now the first thing that we have to do on our client side, okay, is to go inside this source directory. Then we'll be creating a new file, okay. So I'll just call it socket.js. This is going to contain the logic for creating a socket instance, okay. So here we are actually going to need a library, so I'm just going to first of all install that using npm. So in my terminal I'm writing npm I, okay, and then socket.io dash client. This is the socket io's client side library, okay, for using with javascript. So we are just going to install that here, okay. Now after that installation is done, I'm just going to require that here by writing this expression import io from, okay, and then the name of the library socket io client. Then I'll just basically create this variable socket, okay. Then we'll be actually creating a function, okay. I am just going to call it connect socket, okay, and this is going to receive the user's id as an argument, okay. Let me actually write that here. So user underscore id, then here inside the body of this function what we are going to do, we'll be writing this socket is equal to io. Will be basically passing the base URI of our server here, and for now it's http localhost 3000, okay, 3001 actually. Our server is running on port 3001 as you can see over there, okay. And we have already actually allowed that, okay. You can see inside the core setting of our, when we are creating our io instance on our server, we have already allowed localhost 3000 to be able to connect to this socket instance, okay, on our server side. So that is why we'll be able to successfully connect to that. Here we have a catch, okay. We'll be also passing something inside this property name called query, okay. as you can see, when we are basically using this io.on connection, then we are actually extracting this property user id, okay, from this query, and that is why we'll have to pass that over here. Okay, so the name for this property is going to be user underscore id, and we'll also have to specify its value. Okay, that is why I'm using this template string here. As you can see, we are getting this user id as an argument here, so I'll just use that. Okay, like this. Then the last thing here is to basically just export socket and this connect socket. Okay, so I'll just write export socket comma connect socket like this. Okay, so that we'll be able to make use of these in our other files. We can also actually add a comment here that we are writing this because we want to connect to our server, okay, which is running on localhost port 3001, and we are passing something, okay, inside this query property with the name of user underscore id. So I hope this is clear to you. Now we can actually move on to our next thing. Okay, so after the user is logged in, then you already know we have created this layout folder, okay, and then inside dashboard we have this index.js file. Okay, so here we'll be basically writing some logic which is only going to be executed when the user is logged in. So the first thing that we have here is logged in property, okay, that is already getting extracted from our Redux state. Now what I'm going to do here is I'll just basically start by writing this. So we are going to actually store our user's id in our local storage, okay, and I'll be basically extracting that here by writing this line window dot local storage, okay, and then get item. Here we can just pass the key name, okay, and we'll be storing our user's id with this key of user underscore id in our local storage. Okay, then after that we'll be basically making use of this use effect in order to write some logic which is going to be run on our first render, okay, and also on the subsequent renders when some dependency changes here. Okay, so let's actually see what dependencies we are going to keep here. So it will be is logged in and socket. That means whenever a new socket instance is created or whenever this user is going to log in or log out, then we are going to try to run the logic over here. Okay, and everything that I'm going to write here is going to be supposed to run only on logging in the user. Okay, so that is why I'm going to wrap the logic here inside this condition if is logged in. Okay, then I'm also going to create on reload function here. Okay, so let's actually see what we are basically trying to do here. Okay, so I'll just write on load, basically window dot onload is equal to, then I'll assign it an anonymous function. Okay, then here we are also not going to need any parameters. Okay, I'm just going to write something here. Okay, so I'll just check if there is a hash on our location right now. Okay, so for that we can just write this window dot location. Okay, this is going to give us the url, okay, current url. Then we can basically check if there is any hash over there. Okay, if there is no hash, then what we are going to do, we'll be basically adding a hash. Okay, so I'll just take this window dot location, okay, and then I'll modify it to window dot location, and then I'll concatenate this hash loaded, okay, like this. Then we'll basically call this function window location reload, window dot location dot reload, like this. Now what this function is basically going to do, it is going to make sure that whenever we are loading this layout, okay, then it is going to check in our url if there is any hash at the end, okay, like this hash loaded. If there is not, then it is going to add that, and it is then going to basically reload our page. Okay, this is going to make sure that we are basically reloading our page just once after we logged in. Okay, this is going to basically allow us to connect to our socket instance. Okay, so here I'll be writing window dot reload like this. Okay, then after this is done, I'm going to check if there is any socket instance present or not. Okay, so as you can see, we have placed a condition over here. Okay, we are not basically creating a socket instance directly and then exporting it. We have just defined a variable for that. Okay, and when we call this connect socket method, okay, then only this socket instance is going to be created. Okay, and we are basically doing this because we don't want to create a socket instance without this user id. Okay, and this user id is going to be present only when the user is logged in. Okay, so that is why we'll have to set up this kind of flow here. So I'll be just referencing this socket, okay, from here. Okay, yeah, so we have already imported that socket from the socket file that we created. Okay, then I'll be just writing this logic here. If there is no socket, then I'll be calling this connect socket method that we created, and then we'll also have to pass the user's id. As you can see, we have already extracted our user's id from the local storage. Okay, and we'll be basically writing the logic to store that user id, okay, when the user logs in, and also removing the user id when the user logs out. Now after this is done, we are basically ready to set up some events here. Okay, so the first thing or the first listener that we are going to basically set up here is new friend request. Okay, as you might remember, we have set it up few events that are going to be emitted to our client from our server side. Okay, then we'll have to basically listen for those events on our client side and respond to those. So the first thing that I will be listening to is new friend request. Okay, so you can basically implement it like this: socket.on and then the name of the event. It is going to be here new friend request, like this. Okay, then here we'll be getting a callback. Okay, so that we can execute some logic here. So based on the data that we'll be receiving here, what we are going to do, we are basically just going to dispatch show snack bar. Okay, for that we'll also need this dispatch here. So let's just actually create that quickly. So I'll just write const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. Okay, and we have done this numerous times. So use dispatch is going to come from React Redux. Okay, as you can see on in this line. Okay, line number 3. Now after that is done, what we are going to do, I'll just basically get this source snackbar from our Redux slices app. Okay, and then here we can basically pass the severity and message. We have already done this, okay, in a previous video, so I'm just going to write it fast. In this case, I'll just set the severity to success, and the message is whatever going to be present inside this data.message property. Okay, if you remember, we have basically passed some payload from our backend, okay, while emitting this event, and that message is going to be displayed. Okay, similarly we also need to set up some other event listeners here. Okay, so let me actually do that quickly. So the next is going to be request accepted. Okay, request underscore accepted. Okay, and here will be basically, again, we don't need to change the message or the severity, so that is going to remain the same exactly. Okay, again, then the next event listener, and it is going to be request sent, request underscore sent, like this. Okay, and again this part is going to remain the same. Then there is one very important thing here. We'll have to basically remove this event listener, okay, when this component is going to be unmount. So for that I'm just moving out of this if condition. Okay, then I'll basically write a cleanup function here. Okay, so here we can just basically specify this function in this return of use effect, and this is going to be called when our component is going to be unmounted. Okay, so here I'll just say socket.off. Okay, and then the name of the event listener. So the first event listener that I want to basically call off is new friend request, and then the second one is request accepted and request sent. Okay, so we can basically write it like this: request underscore accepted, and then the next is socket.off. Okay, and here it will be request sent, like this. Okay, so this is now completely done. Okay, so you can basically save this file, and you can also save this socket.js file. Okay, but still we need to make some more changes. Okay, so as we discussed here, inside this index.js file we are using this user id from our local storage, but we haven't implemented anything yet in order to store this user id property in our local storage. So let's actually see how we can do that. Okay, so again I'm just going to basically collapse all of my open editors. So again you can move inside the source folder. Okay, then go inside this Redux folder, open up the slices. Okay, and if you go inside this auth.js file, okay, so the first thing that we are going to do here is to basically modify the login user. Okay, and we are also going to modify another trunk action here, which is basically going to be this verify email. Okay, because if you remember correctly, whenever a new user signs up on our application, okay, and then in the second step when they verify their email, then we are going to get this token in our response. Okay, now we are going to basically modify this verify email controller on our backend. Okay, so that it is also going to send us the user id. Okay, and then we'll be using that user id from the response object to store it in our local storage. Okay, so here first of all I'm just going to write that. Okay, and then we'll do the corresponding change on our backend. So I'll just write window dot local storage. Okay, and then this set item method. Here we can just pass the key name. Okay, so that will be user underscore id, and then the value which is going to be stored in this key name. Okay, and that can be derived using this response dot data. Okay, and then user underscore id, like this. Okay, so I'm just going to take this line. Okay, and this same thing will be implemented here as well inside this login user functionality. Okay, so here inside this login user you can see we are getting this token in our response. So right after that I'm going to write this line window dot local storage dot set item. With this key name user underscore id, we are going to store the value whatever is going to be contained inside response dot data dot user underscore id. Okay, similarly we'll also have to remove it when the user logs out. Okay, so in that case we'll be basically using this remove item. Okay, and in this case we don't need to pass any value, we are just removing that property from our local storage. So it is just going to require this key name. Okay, which is user underscore id. Let me actually move this before this dispatch. Okay, now we just need to format this document. Okay, then we'll be moving on to our backend to make the corresponding changes. So here in our auth controller you can just first of all go inside the login user flow. Okay, so I'll be just searching for login here. So as you can see this is our login controller. Okay, and at the end if you just look, we are going to send a token to the user. Okay, like this. I'm just going to add one more property. Okay, which we are basically extracting on our client side, and that is user underscore id. Okay, and as you can see we can just simply pass that by using this user dot underscore id. Okay, so that's it. And similarly for the verify email, okay, let me search for that verify email. Actually we have that with a different name here. Okay, so we'll have to basically look for it. Yeah, this is verify otp. Okay, so at the end again we are going to add one more property in our response object. Okay, that is going to be user underscore id, and the value for that is going to be derived from this user document. Okay, like this. So I hope this makes complete sense to you. Okay, then we are basically ready to complete our client side. Okay, by basically adding the components that we were talking in the that we were talking about in the last video. Okay, so again you need to move inside the sections folder. Okay, then go inside this main and friends. Okay, so if you remember in the last video we created these three lists, but nothing was actually getting rendered onto our because we were just rendering react fragments. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, we'll be creating simple components for each of these three lists. Okay, and then we'll be just passing those components over here along with corresponding props.